Hi, I'm Julia, and welcome back to the English Talk community. I'm so glad you're here with me today because we're going to explore something that seems simple, but it's actually a huge deal when you're learning English: asking questions. Not grammar questions, not trick questions, just everyday, normal questions like, "Where are you from?" or "Can I sit here?" The kind of questions that can lead to real conversations, new friendships, or even job opportunities. But here's the catch. Not all questions are understood the way we expect. And a lot of that has nothing to do with vocabulary or grammar. It has everything to do with pronunciation. You see, pronunciation is one of those skills that can be invisible until it becomes a problem. You might be speaking clearly in your mind. You might be saying the exact right words, but somehow the other person doesn't respond the way you expected. Maybe they look confused. Maybe they hesitate before answering. Or maybe they answer a completely different question. If this has happened to you, you're definitely not alone. It's frustrating. And it can make you question yourself even when your English is technically correct. Today, I want to help you change that. I want to show you why pronunciation, especially when asking questions, is a powerful skill that often gets ignored. And I'm not talking about having a perfect accent. I'm not here to tell you to sound like you're from New York or London or Sydney. That's not the point. What matters more is clarity, rhythm, and confidence. Because when you ask a question in English, your voice needs to carry the message just as much as your words do. Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how in English, the tone goes up at the end of a yes-no question? Like when someone says, "Are you okay?" There's that rising sound at the end. Now compare that to a statement, "You are okay." The words are almost the same, but the sound is different. That's intonation. It's subtle, but it tells the listener what kind of sentence you're saying, and it makes a big difference. Here's an example. A listener once told me that during a trip to Dublin, she asked someone, "You are from here?" She thought she was being friendly and curious, but the local person seemed a little confused. It turned out her voice was flat, no rise at the end, so it sounded more like a statement than a question. That tiny difference in pronunciation made her sound like she was just confirming something, not asking. Once she practiced saying, "Are you from here?" with the rising tone, people responded more naturally. This happens all the time. And what's even more interesting is that this confusion doesn't just happen between native and non-native speakers. It happens across accents, across cultures, across levels. That's why focusing on pronunciation, especially the pronunciation of questions, is so helpful. It's a small shift that makes a big impact. Now, I know some people feel nervous when they hear the word pronunciation. It can sound technical or even intimidating. But don't worry, we're not diving into the International Phonetic Alphabet. Here, I'm not going to ask you to memorize a bunch of symbols. Instead, I want to give you practical, real-world tools that you can use today. Tools that will help you sound more natural, more fluent, and more confident when you're asking questions in English. Because asking questions isn't just about getting answers. It's about creating connections, and better pronunciation helps you do that. Before we go any further, let me ask you something directly. Have you ever had a moment where you asked a question in English and felt misunderstood? Or maybe the person responded, but it didn't quite match what you were expecting? If that's ever happened to you, I want you to know. It's not your fault, and it's not a sign that you're bad at English. It just means there's a small gap between what you're saying and how it's being heard, and pronunciation can bridge that gap. Here's something I tell all my students, no matter where they're from. When it comes to pronunciation, clarity beats perfection. You don't have to erase your accent. You don't have to sound like anyone else. You just need to be understood. And often, being understood comes from how you shape your questions, with your tone, your rhythm, and your voice. So let's make this practical right away. Think of a question you asked recently in English. Maybe something like, "Can you help me?" or "What time is the meeting?" Say it out loud right now, just to yourself. Listen to your tone. Did your voice rise at the end of "Can you help me?" Did it fall slightly on "What time is the meeting?" These little patterns are the key to sounding more natural. And the more you become aware of them, the easier it becomes to use them naturally. This is one of the reasons I love working on pronunciation. not because it's about being perfect, but because it gives you power. The power to express yourself clearly. The power to ask for what you need. The power to connect with others. And honestly, that's what learning English is all about. It's not about passing a test. It's about living your life more freely in another language. Asking for directions. Ordering a coffee. Starting a conversation. Joining a meeting. All of these moments begin with questions. And those questions become easier and more effective when your pronunciation is working with you, not against you. So if you've ever held back from speaking because you weren't sure how your question would sound, or because you were afraid of saying it wrong, I want you to stay with me today. Because we're going to take away that fear and replace it with confidence. We're going to focus on real-life situations, simple techniques, and small shifts that lead to big results. No judgment, no pressure, just useful, human, everyday English. The kind that helps you feel like yourself when you speak. And if you're enjoying this already, take a second to like this episode and subscribe to the English Talk community. It really helps us grow and reach more learners who need this kind of practical, supportive content. Plus, it lets us know you're part of the journey, right here, with us, every step of the way. English can feel hard sometimes, but you don't have to do it alone. We're building this community together. Let's take that first step today, together, and explore how your voice can become your greatest tool in asking questions that open conversations, build confidence, and help you connect with the world. Ready? Let's keep going. Let me introduce you to someone I worked with not too long ago. His name is Luca, and he's from Milan, Italy. Luca had been studying English for years. He knew the grammar rules, could write complex emails, and even helped his colleagues translate technical documents at work. On paper, Luca was advanced, but something wasn't clicking for him during conversations. Every time he tried to ask questions in English, people either didn't understand him or gave him puzzled looks. He told me, "Julia, I say the words correctly, but they look at me like I said something strange." It was frustrating, especially because he put so much effort into learning the language. One day during one of our sessions, Luca tried asking me a simple question. "You are going to the party?" The grammar wasn't the problem. I understood what he meant. But it didn't sound like a question. His voice was flat, as if he were making a statement. And that's when it clicked for both of us. His English wasn't missing vocabulary or grammar. What was missing was the sound of a question. That rising intonation at the end, the signal that tells your listener, "I'm asking something, not just saying something." This happens all the time. Learners focus so much on getting the words right that they forget about the melody of the sentence. But in English, melody, also called intonation, is what separates a question from a statement. Think about it. You are going to the party. That's a statement. I'm telling you something. But you are going to the party? With a rising tone at the end. That's a question. The same words, two different meanings. And when you don't use the rising tone, your listener might not realize you're actually asking for information. I remember Luca's face when I demonstrated this difference. He was surprised. He said, "I had no idea that just the tone could change the meaning." And he's right. Most learners aren't taught this clearly. They're given the sentence structure for a question, but they're not shown how it sounds when spoken naturally. And so they use the right grammar, but the wrong tone, and communication breaks down. Once we started practicing intonation together, Luca's confidence started to grow. We used very simple yes-no questions and exaggerated the rising tone at the end. Questions like, "Do you like coffee?" or "Is she coming?" He felt a bit silly at first because it sounded dramatic to him, but I told him, that's okay. It's better to exaggerate when you're practicing. Your ear and your mouth need to get used to this rhythm. And slowly, it started to feel more natural for him. One of the best exercises we did was something I call mirror questioning. I would say a question, and he would repeat it immediately after me, copying my tone exactly. Not just the words, the music. We did this over and over. "Are you tired?" Do you work here? Here's the thing I really want you to understand. In English, especially in spoken English, pronunciation often matters more than grammar. People don't walk around with a grammar checklist in their heads. They listen to how you sound. And if your question doesn't sound like a question, they might not even realize you're asking one. It's not about being perfect. It's about being understood. And intonation is a huge part of that. Sometimes learners think, but I used question words. I said, "Are you coming?" or "Do you know him?" That should be clear, right? But if you say, "Are you coming?" with a falling tone, it sounds like you're confirming something, not actually asking. Imagine hearing, "Are you coming?" flatly versus "Are you coming?" with the rising tone. That tiny shift changes the entire experience for the listener. Let me give you another real-life example. Luca told me about a time he asked his American coworker, "You have the report?" It was during a stressful moment, and he wanted to ask politely. But again, his tone was flat. The coworker paused, then replied, "Yes, I have it." But there was tension. Later, Luca realized that it might have come across as demanding or even accusatory, just because the sentence didn't sound like a question. If he had said, "Do you have the report?" with that upward tone, the same message would have sounded cooperative, not pushy. That's the power of pronunciation. This is one of those details that can truly transform the way people respond to you. It's not about having perfect English. It's about making sure your message is received the way you intended. And that's what happened with Luca. Once he got comfortable using intonation, people stopped asking him to repeat. They responded faster, they smiled more, conversations flowed, and it wasn't because he added new words, it was because he changed the way he used the words he already knew. One day during our session, I asked Luca to make a list of common questions he uses at work and in social situations. Things like, "Do you need help?" "Can I join the meeting?" "Are you free this afternoon?" We recorded them. First, he said them how he used to, flat, unsure, a little hesitant. Then we practiced together, and he recorded them again, with proper intonation. When we played them back, the difference was like night and day. He laughed and said, "That second version sounds like someone who knows what they're doing." And I told him, "That's because it is you. You just found your voice." So if you're listening right now and you've ever felt ignored or misunderstood when asking a question in English, think about the sound of your question. Don't worry too much about advanced grammar or long vocabulary lists. Focus on that rising tone. Listen to native speakers ask yes/no questions. Copy them. Record yourself. Repeat phrases out loud like you're practicing a song. The rhythm is just as important as the words. What happened to Luca isn't rare. It's incredibly common. But the good news is that once you notice the problem, you can start fixing it right away. You don't need special tools or apps. You just need awareness, practice, and a little bit of patience with yourself. Luca learned that a clear, confident question isn't just about getting information. It's about connection. And that connection starts with how your voice carries your message. Let your voice do the work. You already know more English than you think. You just have to let it sound like it. And that starts with how you ask. Let me take you back to a small cafe in Amsterdam, where something very simple, but very important, happened to Luca. He had flown there for a weekend trip, hoping to relax a bit after a busy few months at work. One afternoon, he stepped into a charming corner cafe with tall windows and the smell of fresh pastries everywhere. There was a long communal table with a few empty spots, and he wanted to sit down. So he turned to a local sitting nearby and said, "Is this seat taken?" Just like that. No rising tone, no change in pitch, just flat. The woman he spoke to paused. She looked up, hesitated, and gave a confused shrug. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. And Luca wasn't sure what to do. He stood there awkwardly, then decided to sit, feeling slightly embarrassed. Later, he told me about this moment and said, "Julia, I asked the question, but I think she didn't understand me." And he was right, not because his grammar was wrong, but because his voice didn't sound like a question. His intonation didn't carry the signal of curiosity or polite uncertainty. It sounded like he was stating something, not asking. That cafe moment became a turning point for him. It made him realize that people react not just to our words, but to how we say them. The next morning, he stood in front of the mirror in his hotel room and started practicing that same sentence. Is this seat taken? He played with his voice, lifting the pitch slightly at the end. Just a gentle rise. And something shifted. The sentence felt more like a question. It sounded more like a request, not a declaration. He didn't change the words, just the shape of the sentence in his mouth. That's when it hit him. Intonation changes everything. So many English learners go through this. They focus on vocabulary, they memorize phrases, but when they speak, the emotion doesn't come through. And in English, the rise and fall of your voice can change the entire meaning of a sentence. Think of intonation like facial expressions for your voice. When you ask, "Is this seat taken?" with a rising tone at the end, it sounds polite, respectful, and curious. When you say it flatly, it can sound bored or even a bit cold. You're not just saying words. You're signaling intentions. Intonation is what helps people read between the lines. And in a second language, that can be the difference between connection and confusion. Let's slow this down and really look at why it matters. In English, when we ask yes, no questions, we usually raise our pitch at the end. It's a universal way of showing uncertainty or inviting a response. Do you like tea? Are you from Berlin? Is it open now? That little rise is like a question mark made out of sound. Without it, you're asking your listener to guess whether you're sharing a thought or requesting an answer. I remember another story Luca told me. Later on that same trip, he went back to the same cafe. This time, he saw another local seated at the communal table. He walked up and, using his newly practiced sentence, said, "Is this seat taken?" with that gentle, rising tone. And guess what? The person smiled and said, "No, go ahead." That tiny change in pitch opened the door to a human interaction. No awkward silence, no confusion, just a natural response. All because of intonation. It's not just about sounding polite. Intonation adds life to your words. It shows confidence, warmth, interest. It shows that you're engaged in the conversation. And people feel that. They don't just process your words, they feel your intention. That's why it's so powerful. I often work with learners who feel like something is missing when they speak. They say, "I know the words, but I still sound awkward." And I always ask, have you listened to how native speakers use their voices? Because if you close your eyes and listen to fluent speakers, you'll hear that English isn't spoken in a straight line. It moves. It rises and falls like waves. That movement is what gives it rhythm and meaning. And when you start to use that same rhythm, your speech becomes clearer and more natural. Practicing intonation doesn't have to be complicated. You can start with simple questions and exaggerate the rise at the end. Say them out loud. Are you okay? Is this yours? Can I help you? Feel the way your voice lifts. You might feel strange at first, especially if your native language uses different patterns. But your brain and your mouth need time to adjust. It's like learning to dance to a new kind of music. At first, you think too much. Then, it starts to feel right. Another great tip is to shadow real conversations. Watch a scene from a movie or a short video where someone is asking questions. Pause and repeat them out loud, matching the intonation exactly. You're not just learning the words, you're learning the feel of English. That's what will help you sound more fluent, more relaxed, and more in control. Luca did this with podcasts and short clips from interviews. He would rewind the same question 5 or 6 times, then repeat it to himself until it felt natural. He told me it was like teaching his voice a new skill, and over time, he stopped thinking about it. The rising tone became automatic. It was no longer a conscious effort. It became part of how he spoke. Sometimes learners ask me if it's okay to sound too expressive or too dramatic when using intonation. And my answer is yes. English is a language that welcomes expression through the voice. It's not only okay, it's often expected. When you ask someone a question without that expression, it can come off as distant or unsure. But when your voice shows curiosity or engagement, you invite the other person to connect with you. Think about it like this. Your voice is part of your message. It's not just a tool for pushing out words. It's part of the way you communicate. Mood. If you've ever asked a question and gotten silence, or noticed people hesitating to respond, don't assume your English is wrong. Ask yourself, did I sound like I was asking something, or did I just say the words? Your voice carries so much more meaning than you might realize. It's worth giving it attention, and it starts with something as simple as lifting your tone at the end of a question. Let your questions rise, not just in pitch, but in confidence. That rise invites others in. And when you master that one little sound, you'll see just how much easier it becomes to make yourself understood. Let me tell you about May. She's a university student from Seoul, South Korea, and one of the brightest people I've ever met. She's sharp, curious, and completely fluent when reading or listening in English. In class, she could follow lectures, take notes, and even write impressive essays. But when it came to speaking, especially when asking questions, everything changed. Her confidence would drop in seconds. She told me once, "I feel like I turn into a different person when I open my mouth." It all started during her exchange program, when she began studying at a university in Toronto. She had prepared for this moment for years, reading novels in English, watching movies without subtitles, and even practicing grammar drills every day. So when she landed in Canada, she thought she was ready. But something unexpected happened. On her first day at the campus library, she wanted to ask a simple question. Where is the printing room? She rehearsed it in her head a few times, walked up to the front desk, and said it. But the person behind the counter blinked and replied, "Sorry?" May repeated the question, a little softer this time. Still, the staff member looked unsure. Finally, May pointed to the map on the wall, and the conversation ended there. Later, she told me, "I said the right words, Julia, but something didn't work." She was right. Her grammar was fine. Her vocabulary was fine. What was missing was clarity, especially in the way she pronounced the question word, where. When I asked her to repeat the full sentence for me, she said, "Where is the printing room?" But it came out rushed, almost like, "Where is the printing room?" All the words were mashed together. There was no clear separation, no emphasis, no rhythm. That's when it hit her. She wasn't being understood, not because of her accent, but because she wasn't owning the keyword in her question. In English, WH questions, those that begin with where, what, when, who, why, and how, carry a lot of weight. These words tell the listener, here comes something important. They act like signposts. If they're unclear or rushed, the rest of the sentence can become a blur. It's like trying to give someone directions, but mumbling the street name. You might be saying the right thing, but it won't land. So May and I started working on just one thing, slowing down the beginning of her questions. I asked her to say the word where all by itself. Then again, but louder. She laughed at first. It felt silly, but she did it. And each time I reminded her that this one word needs to shine. It's not just a functional word. It's the star of the sentence. The clearer she said it, the more natural everything else became. Once, she got used to slowing down and stressing the question word. We moved on to full questions. Where is the printing room? Where is the student cafe? Where are the books on psychology? And little by little, her sentences stopped sounding like rushed bundles of words. They started sounding like real questions, with a rhythm and a purpose. We focused especially on the first word, where, because that's what the listener latches onto first. I also taught her something that changed her mindset. When you ask a question in English, you're not just speaking, you're leading. You're guiding the conversation, and that means your voice needs to be clear and confident, especially at the start. May had never thought of it that way. She always felt like she was interrupting or bothering people when she asked a question. But when she realized that asking questions is a form of leadership, she began to speak with more purpose. One day, she went back to the same library. This time, she walked up to the front desk and asked clearly and slowly, "Where is the printing room?" The staff member smiled and gave her directions right away. May said it felt like magic, but of course it wasn't magic. It was practice. It was focus. It was the power of making one word, where, stand out. What she learned is something every English learner should know. You don't need to speak fast to sound fluent. You don't need fancy words. What you do need is clarity. And that often starts with the first word you say, especially with question words. If those aren't clear, the rest of your question doesn't matter, because people will already be confused. May also noticed another thing. Once she mastered the pronunciation of where, it became easier to do the same with other WH words. She practiced what, when, why, and how, each with the same idea. Say it clearly, confidently, and a little slower than you think you need to. She said them while walking around campus. She said them in the shower. She said them while waiting for the bus. Each time she practiced, her confidence grew a little more, and that confidence changed everything. She started participating in group discussions. She asked questions during lectures. She no longer froze when a native speaker turned to her and said, "Do you have any questions?" Because now she did, and she could ask them. Let me be honest. With you, May is not a rare case. What she experienced is something I've seen in learners from every continent. From Paris to Bangkok, from Cairo to Tokyo. People study hard, they know their grammar, they memorize vocabulary. But when it's time to ask, their voice gets small. Their words blur together. They feel unsure. And then they blame themselves for not being fluent enough. But fluency is not perfection. Fluency is about flow, and flow begins with clarity. When you ask a question, your job is to guide the listener. That means slowing down, making space around important words, and using your voice with intention. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. I tell my students to treat question words like keys. If your key is the wrong shape, or if you fumble with it, the door won't open. But if you place it gently, clearly, and with confidence, it slides in. The conversation opens. May learned this, and you can too. Her story is a reminder that the smallest details, like how you pronounce a single word, can have a huge impact. Not just on how others understand you, but on how you feel when you speak. Confidence doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from being understood. And that starts with letting your words come through, especially the first ones. 1. Of the biggest changes I've seen in students comes when they finally stop trying to rush through a sentence and instead focus on starting clearly. This was exactly what happened with May. You already know her story, her struggles with being understood when asking questions, her breakthrough moment in the library, and how she started working on slowing down. But here's where it got even more interesting. Once she realized that the beginning of her sentence was the most important part, she didn't just improve, she transformed. At first, May didn't believe something as simple as the start of a question could make such a difference. Like many learners, she thought she needed to speak quickly to sound fluent. She told me, "Native speakers talk fast, so I thought I should too." But the truth is, speed is not what makes you sound fluent. Clarity is, especially at the beginning of a sentence. The moment you start to speak, your listener is trying to figure out, are you asking something? Are you giving information? Should they respond? The first few words answer all those questions. And if those first words aren't clear, everything else gets harder. So we began a new kind of practice. I asked May to isolate the question words where, what, when, why, who, how. No full sentences, just those words, one by one. Slowly, clearly, with full voice. At first she felt awkward, like she was acting in a play. But after a few tries, she started to notice the difference. Where? She let the sound rise gently at the end. What? She added a slight pause after it, giving space for the listener to tune in. When? She made sure every letter came through. And once she got comfortable with the words on their own, we built up full sentences. This is what changed everything for her. She stopped diving into her questions and started leading into them. Instead of, "Where is the cafeteria?" she said, "Where is the cafeteria?" Instead of, "What time class start?" she said, "What time does the class start?" The difference wasn't just in pronunciation, it was in presence. She was inviting people to listen, not rushing through the sentence hoping they'd catch her meaning. We practiced a method I call clear starts. It's simple but powerful. You take the first word of your question, the question word, and you say it like it matters, not rushed, not hidden. You say it like a signal, because that's exactly what it is. A question word at the beginning of a sentence tells the listener, I'm about to ask something and I need your attention. If you mumble it, May noticed this immediately in her daily life. She stopped getting blank stares when she asked for directions. She stopped being interrupted in conversations. People stopped saying, sorry? Or, could you repeat that? Because they understood her from the very first word. And this gave her a new kind of confidence. Not because she suddenly had perfect grammar or sounded like AA network error occurred. Please check your connection and try again. If this issue persists, please contact us through our help center at help.openai.com. I've seen this happen so many times. Learners who believe they need to sound sophisticated to be taken seriously in English. They think that using long, complex sentences with formal words will help them sound fluent or intelligent. I get it. We often think that big words mean better communication. But here's the truth. Simplicity is not a weakness. It's a strength. And when it comes to asking questions in English, the simpler your sentence, the more effective it becomes. Let me give you an example. A student of mine, Sophia from Madrid, once asked a receptionist at a hotel, "Excuse me, could you kindly inform me of the estimated time of commencement for the dinner service?" Now, grammatically speaking, that sentence is perfectly fine. She had studied hard to build it, but the receptionist stared at her for a moment and said, "Sorry, what was that?" The sentence was too formal, too long, and too unexpected for a casual setting. Now imagine if Sophia had just asked, "What time does dinner start?" It's short, it's clear, and most importantly, it's natural. That's the kind of language people use every day. You don't need to dress your sentences up in fancy words. You just need to say what you mean. That's what real communication is all about. When you speak simply, you give yourself room to breathe. You remove the pressure to be perfect. You focus on connection, not performance. And that changes everything. I always tell my students, speak like you're talking to a friend. Not because you want to sound casual all the time, but because when you're relaxed, your English flows more naturally. Another student I worked with, Arjun from Mumbai, used to freeze up in meetings because he was trying to memorize complicated sentence structures. He'd say things like, "Would you happen to possess any additional details regarding the aforementioned report?" But by the time he got halfway through the question, people were already lost or impatient. He told me he felt like he was carrying a giant bag of bricks every time he spoke. So we made a small change. He started asking, "Do you have more info about the report?" That was it. 5 simple words, and people answered him immediately. The funny thing is, the simpler his questions became, the more confident he felt. And that confidence made him sound even more fluent. Because fluency isn't about using complicated grammar. It's about keeping the conversation going. You don't need to impress anyone with your vocabulary. You need to reach them with your message. Let's break this down into a clear tip. If your goal is to be understood, and that should always be the goal, then your questions should be short, direct, and easy to follow. Think of them as tools. A question is a way to open a door in a conversation. The simpler the tool, the faster you can use it. Try comparing these 2 questions. Could you kindly inform me where the registration area is located? Where is registration? Which one would you rather say if you were nervous? Which one is faster and more natural? The second one, of course. And trust me, native speakers aren't using the first one either. Not unless they're writing a formal letter or working in a very traditional environment. I know some of you may worry that speaking simply will make you sound too basic. But here's the thing. Native speakers use simple questions all the time. In fact, the more confident someone is, the more they simplify their speech. They don't feel the need to decorate their sentences. They just say what they mean. There's also something else to consider. When you use simple, clear language, you reduce the chance of misunderstanding. That helps both you and the person you're speaking to feel more comfortable. Think of it like this. You're building a bridge between 2 minds. That bridge doesn't need to be fancy. It just needs to be strong. Let's take another example. I had a conversation with Akiko, a graphic designer from Tokyo. She was preparing for a job interview in English and had written out a list of questions she wanted to ask the interviewer. One of her questions was, would it be possible for you to elaborate on the specific expectations the company holds regarding the daily responsibilities of this role? It's a mouthful, right? So I asked her, what do you really want to know? She said, I want to know what I'll do every day. Perfect. So we changed the question to, what are the daily tasks in this role? Still polite, still professional, but much easier to say and to understand. Akiko was relieved. It feels lighter, she said, and that's the key. Simple questions feel better. They lower the pressure on your brain. You don't have to carry so many pieces in your head, and that helps you stay calm and focused. Now let's talk about real conversations. Imagine you're in a coffee shop in New York and you want to ask when the shop closes. You could say, would you be able to provide information on the closing time of this establishment? But you don't need that. Just ask, what time do you close? That's what locals say. That's what feels natural. And that's what gets you the answer you need. So here's something you can try right now. Take some of the questions you've memorized or written down in your notebook, the long ones, and see how you can make them shorter. Practice saying them out loud. Pay attention to how it feels. You'll probably notice that the simpler ones are easier to say. They flow better. They feel more like you. I always say, simple questions create space for real answers. Because when the listener isn't trying to decode your sentence, they can just focus on what you're asking. And that's the whole point. You want to connect, not confuse. And one more thing, using simple language doesn't mean being lazy. It means being smart. It means choosing words that work. And it shows that you understand the goal of communication, not to show off, but to share ideas. So, remember this. When in doubt, go for the shorter version. Keep your question focused. Say it with clarity. And trust that your message will be stronger that way. You're not in a grammar competition. You're in a conversation. And conversations thrive on clarity, ease, and flow. I'll never forget the story Akeem shared with me. He works in IT support at a busy tech company in Nairobi, and from the outside, you'd think he had it all figured out. His English was excellent, his vocabulary was rich, and he could explain technical issues clearly. But every time he had to speak during meetings, especially when he needed to ask a question, something strange happened. He either hesitated or worse, he'd ask his question and no one would respond, at least not the way he expected. At first, he thought maybe his colleagues were ignoring him. Then he wondered if they didn't understand his accent. But one day, after a team meeting, one of his coworkers approached him and said something that completely changed the way Akeem thought about his communication. The colleague said, "Hey, I didn't realize you were asking something. It sounded like you were giving a command." That moment stuck with him. And when he told me this story, I could see the mix of surprise and frustration in his face. "Julia," he said, "I've been asking questions without even sounding like I'm asking questions." And this is something I see often, especially with learners who are confident in their grammar and vocabulary, but haven't quite mastered the rhythm of spoken English. Because here's the thing, questions don't just look different from statements on paper. They sound different, they move differently. And if you don't get that rhythm right, people might not even realize you're asking something. Let me give you an example of what Akeem used to say. In a meeting, he might ask, "You sent the report yesterday?" But without rising intonation and without any rhythm shift, it came out sounding flat and firm, almost like a statement. And because of that, people sometimes felt like he was making a correction or giving an instruction, not asking. No wonder they didn't respond the way he expected. Once Akeem became aware of this issue, he started paying attention to the sound of his questions. He realized that when his native English-speaking colleagues asked questions, their tone went up at the end, not just in yes-no questions, but sometimes even in what-h questions, depending on the context. The rhythm of their voice would shift, making it clear they were inviting a response, not stating a fact. We practiced this together. I asked him to take a few common work-related questions and say them in two ways. First, as a flat statement, and then again with the natural rhythm of a question. For example, you submitted the request. Now with the correct rhythm, you submitted the request. That rising tone at the end doesn't just make it sound more like a question, it also softens it. It shows that you're open to hearing an answer, that you're not making an assumption, but genuinely checking or confirming something. It creates space in the conversation for the other person to step in. Akeem also learned to use a slight pause before asking. I remember one exercise that made a big difference for him. I asked him to listen to short clips of real meetings or interviews in English and write down only the questions. Then he would read them out loud and try to mimic the rhythm and intonation exactly as he heard them. We focused less on the words and more on the melody of the question. That's when it really clicked. Another part of his practice was visualizing punctuation in his mind. I told him to imagine a question mark at the end of every question he said. That small mental image helped him remember to lift his voice, even if just slightly. And he noticed that once he added that little change, the people around him started responding more naturally. There was no more awkward silence. People knew he was asking something, and they jumped in to answer. This breakthrough didn't just improve his communication, it transformed how he felt during meetings. He told me, "Now when I speak, I feel like people hear me." That's such a powerful shift, and it came from something so small, a change in rhythm. There's something else he noticed too. When his tone was flat, his body language was tense. His shoulders rose, his jaw tightened, but when he started using the right intonation, he also relaxed physically. He looked more open, more confident. It was as if his voice and body were finally working together, and it wasn't just at work. Akeem started noticing how question rhythm worked in everyday situations. At a restaurant, instead of saying, "You have vegetarian options?" he now asked, "Do you have vegetarian options?" That little "do you" and the gentle rise in his voice made his question sound polite, clear, and confident. He told me, "Now I think of tone as part of the meaning. It's like punctuation UI. Speak out loud." I love that. Because he's exactly right. When you write, you have commas and question marks to help the reader. When you speak, your tone is your punctuation. So if you've ever felt like people didn't realize you were asking something, maybe it's not your words, it's your rhythm. Think of how music has beats, rises, and falls. English questions work the same way. They need that shift, that movement, that openness. Practice listening to how native speakers ask questions. Mimic their tone. Don't worry about matching every word perfectly. Focus on the flow. Focus on that upward lift at the end. And when you speak, imagine you're not just saying words, you're guiding someone into a conversation with you. Just like Akeem, you might already have all the right vocabulary. You might even have perfect grammar. But without the rhythm, your message might get lost. Don't let that happen. Your voice has music in it. Let that music guide your listener. When you ask a question, make sure your tone invites an answer. Akeem's story is such a powerful reminder that fluency isn't just about words, it's about the way you say them. And once you find your rhythm, people don't just hear your English, they feel it. I often tell my students that learning English is a lot like learning a musical instrument. At first, you think it's just about notes, or in our case, just about words. But then you start to realize that there's something deeper happening beneath the surface. Rhythm, tone, melody. The music of the language. That's what makes speech come alive. That's what helps people understand you, not just the words you say, but how you say them. English, like music, has a pattern. And if you learn to hear and feel that pattern, your speaking becomes not just correct, but clear and engaging. When I first explain this idea, many learners are surprised. They think pronunciation is only about getting the sounds right. But the truth is, even if your individual sounds are perfect, your message can still feel confusing if your intonation doesn't match what you're trying to say. Think about it. If I say, "You're going to the meeting," with a rising pitch at the end, it sounds like I'm asking. But if I say the exact same sentence with a falling tone, it sounds like I'm telling you something. Same words, different music, Completely different message. Let's break it down. In English, statements usually have a falling intonation. That means your voice starts strong and then gradually drops by the end. For example, she lives in London. Your pitch begins higher and naturally falls on the word London. It sounds final, like you're done sharing that piece of information. Now let's switch to questions. Yes, no questions. Like, do you like coffee? Or are you coming tonight? Usually rise at the end. Your voice should go up slightly to show that you're expecting a yes or no answer. That rising pitch signals openness. It invites the listener to respond. It's one of the clearest ways English shows that something is a question. UH questions like, where are you going? Or what did you say? Often have a different pattern. They tend to start with a strong pitch and then fall slightly at the end. So the word where might start higher, and then your pitch drops on the final word, going. It's not as dramatic as yes, no questions, but it still follows a pattern. It feels steady, like a beat in a song. When you're not sure about your intonation, try reading questions out loud and paying attention to where your voice naturally rises or falls. Even better, try listening to native speakers and mimic their tone exactly. You'll start to notice that English has a certain rhythm, and when you match it, your speech flows much more smoothly. I once worked with a student from Brazil named Renata. She was a fantastic speaker, clear vocabulary, great grammar, but sometimes people still didn't catch her questions. One day she asked me, Julia, why do people always answer my questions with, what? Even when I think I said it correctly? I listened to her speak, and I immediately noticed something. Her voice didn't rise or fall. It stayed completely flat. She was saying the right words, but her tone was hiding the meaning. We did a small exercise together. I gave her a few simple sentences and asked her to sing them, not really sing like music, but stretch the words out and exaggerate the rise and fall in her voice. At first she laughed because it felt strange, but after a few minutes, something shifted. She started to feel the natural movement in the sentences. Her questions started sounding like questions. Her confidence grew. And just like that, people stopped saying what after she spoke. The funny thing is, once you start hearing English as music, you can't unhear it. You'll begin noticing patterns everywhere. TV shows, podcasts, conversations, all of them are full of musical signals. Rising tones, falling tones, rhythm breaks, pauses. It's all there, guiding the listener and shaping the message. One technique I recommend is marking your sentences with arrows. Write down a sentence like, are you okay? And draw a little arrow going up at the end. That tells your voice to lift. For WH questions, like, where are we going? Draw a small peak at the start of the sentence and then a line going down. That tells you to start strong and finish with a slight fall. These visual cues help train your brain and your voice to work together. You can also try tapping your hand or foot while you speak. This helps you feel the beat of the sentence. English often has a stress-timed rhythm, which means that some words are stressed and others are lighter. When you feel that rhythm, your speech sounds more natural. You're not just reading words, you're performing them, and don't be afraid to exaggerate during practice. Yes, it might feel silly to stretch your voice up and down, or to overdo the stress in your sentences, but that's how you build awareness. Just like dancers need to feel the beat in their body before they can move with grace, speakers need to feel the beat of the language before they can speak with confidence. I also want to remind you that every language has its own music. So if your native language is more monotone or uses different patterns of rise and fall, your brain might resist at first. That's completely normal. You're retraining your ear and your mouth to move in a new way. Give yourself time, be patient. It's like learning a new instrument. It takes practice, but the results are worth it. Another helpful idea is to record yourself. Choose a short paragraph or a list of questions and say them out loud. Then listen to the recording and ask yourself, does it sound flat? Do my questions rise at the end? Do I sound engaged and clear? Compare your version with a native speaker if you can, and don't focus on perfection. Focus on rhythm, on movement, on musicality. Sometimes the smallest changes make the biggest difference. Just a little rise in your voice can turn a confusing sentence into a clear, friendly question. A tiny drop in your tone can signal that you're done speaking. These are the signals native speakers rely on. And the more you use them, the more natural you sound. So the next time you practice English, don't just ask yourself if your grammar is correct. Ask yourself, am I playing the music of English? Am I rising and falling with purpose? Am I guiding my listener with tone and rhythm? When you tune into that side of the language, everything starts to click. English isn't just about words on a page. It's a living, breathing soundscape. And once you learn its melody, your message comes through clearly, confidently, and beautifully. I've worked with so many learners over the years, and one of the most common problems I see, especially when it comes to speaking and being understood, is how people pronounce the key question words. Words like what, where, and how seem small and simple, but if you don't pronounce them clearly, your entire question can become confusing. I've heard learners say what instead of what, or drop the H in how, turning it into ow. Some say where so fast and softly that the listener doesn't even register the word. These tiny errors can lead to big misunderstandings, especially in casual conversation, where there isn't time to stop and ask for clarification. One of the reasons this happens is that many learners focus on the middle or end of the question instead of the beginning. Think about it. In a question like, what time is it? The first word is the signal that a question is coming. It sets the tone. If it's unclear or mumbled, the listener has to work much harder to figure out what you're saying. That's why I always say that the beginning of your sentence carries more weight than you think. It's like a doorway. If the door is hard to open, people hesitate to enter. But if it swings open smoothly and clearly, the whole conversation flows better. Let's take the word what. It's just one syllable, but it has a specific sound that should be respected. The correct pronunciation begins with a clear W sound, followed by a soft and a crisp T at the end. So you're aiming for W-t, not what or why. If you cut off the final T, the word loses its shape. The same goes for where. That initial W needs to be rounded and strong, and the air part needs space to breathe. When learners rush through it, it comes out more like where or way, which makes it harder to catch, especially in noisy environments. And how, this one is often overlooked. Many students drop the H entirely, especially if their native language doesn't use that sound. So instead of how, it sounds like ow. Imagine walking up to someone and saying, "Ow, are you?" You may not notice it yourself, but to a native speaker, it sounds off. Not just unusual, but confusing. And confusion breaks communication. That's what we're trying to avoid. One effective way to fix this is by practicing these words in isolation. Say them as if they were full sentences, not in a whisper, not rushed, but clearly and with intention. Say, what? Like you're genuinely asking a question. Let your voice rise a bit at the end. Say, where? With your lips rounded, then hold the air sound for just a moment before finishing. Say how, like you care about the answer. Really feel the H as you exhale into the word. Doing this helps build muscle memory. Your mouth learns how to move in the right way, and your brain starts connecting the pronunciation with the meaning more automatically. Another trick I use with my students is breaking these words down phonetically. For example, with what, you can practice each sound individually. Start with just the W sound, then add the then the T. Do the same with how. Feel the H at the beginning, make the ow sound, and blend them together. You can even exaggerate it a bit during practice. Say it louder or slower than usual. It might feel strange, but this helps you notice all the sounds you might be skipping when you speak quickly. Some learners also struggle with stress. In English, question words like what, where, and how are often stressed in the sentence. That means they should stand out a bit more. Try saying these two versions out loud. What did you say? And what did you say? In the first one, the word what is strong and clear. It grabs attention. In the second, it gets lost. And that can be the difference between someone understanding you right away or needing you to repeat yourself. It's also helpful to record yourself. This is something I recommend all the time, even if it feels awkward at first. Use your phone or computer, say a few questions out loud, and then listen back. Don't just check for grammar, listen for clarity. Did you say what or what? Was your where easy to understand or did it sound like were? Did your how start with a proper H or did it vanish? This kind of focused listening helps you catch your own habits and improve much faster than just guessing or hoping for the best. And don't forget about linking. In natural speech, native speakers often connect words. So, what are you doing? Can sound like what you doing or where is it might come out as where's it. That's normal in fast casual English. But if your base pronunciation isn't strong, these connected forms become even more confusing for you and for the person listening to you. That's why I always recommend getting the clear, full version right first. Once you're confident with what is your name, then you can start exploring was your name and other blended forms. Clarity doesn't mean being robotic or slow. It means choosing to make your meaning obvious. And the best way to do that is to start strong, with a clear, confident first word. Especially in a question where the listener is waiting for a cue, your opening sound matters a lot. If you nail that first syllable, everything else becomes easier to follow. I remember a learner from Vietnam named Lynn who struggled with this exact problem. She was very fluent, but her questions often left people puzzled. When I asked her to repeat just the first word of each question, it became clear that she was rushing and swallowing the sounds. So we slowed down, took the words apart, and practiced. Just what, where, and how over and over. Within a week, her confidence improved. She told me that people were responding more naturally in conversation, all because she gave more attention to those small but powerful words. So the next time you ask someone a question, pay attention to how you begin. Open your mouth fully. Use your breath. Focus on the shape of each sound. Say what, like it. Matters. Say where, like you really want to know. Say how, like you care about the answer. These tiny adjustments change the entire feeling of your speech. And remember, it's not about sounding like a native speaker. It's about being understood. It's about communicating clearly and confidently, no matter where you're from or what accent you have. The clearer your question words are, the smoother the conversation will go. Let those first words carry your message with strength. I want to share with you the story of Elena, a wonderful woman from Madrid. Elena has always loved meeting tourists in her city. She enjoys practicing her English with people who visit Spain, and she's passionate about sharing her city's culture. But there was one problem she often faced. When she tried to ask questions in English, she would rush through the words. One day, a tourist asked her for directions, and Elena responded with a question herself. But she didn't slow down or pause. Instead, she said quickly, "Where is the metro station?" The tourist blinked and looked confused, not sure what she had just heard. Elena realized in that moment that her words were running together, making it hard for anyone to understand what she was trying to say. This little experience was a big eye-opener for Elena. She understood that even if her English vocabulary was good, speaking too fast could confuse people. So the next time she wanted to ask a question, she decided to change her approach. She took a deep breath, slowed down, and made a clear pause between words. Instead of rushing, she said, "Where is the metro station?" with a calm and measured pace. The difference was like night and day. The tourist's face immediately brightened with understanding, and the conversation flowed smoothly. Elena felt more confident, and the tourist felt respected and heard. What happened with Elena is something I see all the time with learners of English. We often feel pressured to speak quickly because we think that's what fluency means. But in reality, clarity is much more important than speed. When you rush, words can blend together, making your sentences hard to follow. Pausing, even just for a moment, helps your listener process each word, so they don't miss anything. A pause isn't just silence. It's a powerful tool in communication. It gives space for the question to land in the listener's mind. When you say, "Where is the metro station?" and insert a slight pause between each word, you're giving your listener time to understand and respond. Pausing also helps you stay calm and control your breathing, which improves your pronunciation and overall delivery. Elena started practicing this every day. She would rehearse questions aloud, paying special attention to where she could pause. Naturally, for example, she would say, "What time does the train leave?" and pause slightly after what? Time and train. This practice helped her rhythm and clarity, and it made her English sound more natural. Sometimes learners think they need to fill every second with words to sound fluent. But that's a myth. Silence or pause is part of fluent speech. Native. Speakers do it all the time. It's part of the natural music of language. So don't be afraid of pausing. Use it to your advantage, just like Elena did. I also want you to imagine this. When you pause, you're not only helping the listener, but also giving yourself a moment to think. Asking questions in English can be stressful, especially when you're... This is why I encourage you to practice speaking slowly and pausing at natural points in your questions. Start with simple phrases. For example, try saying, "Where is the bathroom?" with a pause between each word. Then move to longer questions, like, "What time does the next bus arrive?" Remember, every pause is a step toward clearer communication. Elena's story teaches us that the power of pausing is simple but effective. You don't have to speak fast to be understood. You don't need perfect pronunciation or grammar to make your questions clear. Just speak clearly, pause, and give your listener time to follow you. If you've ever felt rushed or that people didn't understand you when you asked questions, try Elena's approach. Slow down, pause, and focus on clarity. You'll notice how much easier conversations become, and here's a little tip for practicing at home. Record yourself asking questions with natural pauses. Listen back and notice where you might be rushing or blending words together. Then try again, slower and clearer. Over time, this will become a habit, and your questions will sound more natural and confident, just like Elena's. Pausing is a simple trick, but it makes a huge difference in how you're understood. It helps you connect with people and makes speaking English less stressful. Elena's experience shows us that sometimes all it takes is a little pause to change the whole conversation. So remember, when you're asking questions in English, take a breath, pause where it feels natural, and speak clearly. Your listener will thank you, and you'll feel more confident every time you open your mouth. Let me tell you about one of the most helpful tips I've learned over the years about speaking English clearly and confidently. Using pauses to guide your listener. When you ask questions in English, especially WH questions like what, where, when, why, and how, taking a small pause right after the first word can make a huge difference in how well people understand you. It's a simple change, but it's powerful. Imagine you're asking, "When does the train leave?" If you say it all quickly, it can sound like one long sentence, and the listener might miss the question's meaning or feel rushed trying to catch every word. But if you say it like this, "When does the train leave?" with a slight pause. After "when," you give the listener a moment to prepare for what you're asking. That pause is like a little signal, a signpost that tells the listener, "Pay attention, I'm asking a question here." It makes your question clearer, easier to understand, and more natural sounding. This idea of pausing is a lot like punctuation in writing. Just like commas and periods help readers know when to stop or slow down, pauses in speaking do the same for listeners. Without those pauses, your speech can sound like a non-stop stream of words, which is tiring and confusing to follow. Pauses. Create space in your speech, which helps your listener process each part of your question step by step. Another example could be the question, "Why is he upset?" If you say it without any pause, it might sound rushed and unclear. Why is she upset? But if you slow it down and say, "Why is he upset?" you give the listener time to catch that important question word, why. That pause helps make your question easier to understand and shows that you're asking something important. Using pauses also helps your own pronunciation. When you pause, you naturally slow down, which gives you time to pronounce each word clearly and avoid running your words together. This means your why sounds like why, not why, and when sounds like when, not when. Slowing down and pausing lets your mouth and tongue catch up with your brain, which reduces mistakes and makes your speech smoother. A pause is not silence you should be afraid of. It's a tool, a friend. Pausing shows confidence. When you take a moment before continuing, it tells the listener you're in control of your speech. You're not rushing or nervous, you're clear and deliberate. This calmness helps your listener feel more comfortable and ready to respond. Many learners I work with struggle because they feel they must speak fast to sound fluent. But fluency isn't about speed. It's about clarity and being understood. Pauses are one of the best ways to create that clarity. When you use pauses, your speech becomes easier to follow, your questions stand out, and your conversation flows better. I encourage you to practice this right now. Take a question like, "Where is the nearest bus stop?" and say it aloud. Then try again, adding a small pause after where. Where is the nearest bus stop? Notice how the pause changes the rhythm of your speech and how much easier it is to say each word clearly. You can do this with all kinds of questions. What time does the meeting start? Becomes, what time does the meeting start? Or, how do I get to the airport? Becomes, how do I get to the airport? Each pause acts like a gentle breath in your speech, giving your listener a moment to absorb what you're saying. Another way to think about it is that pauses help you guide the listener's attention. You're telling them, here's the important part of my question. And because your listener can follow your voice's natural rhythm, they feel more engaged and can respond more quickly and accurately. When you pause, you're also helping yourself think. Asking questions in a new language can be challenging. Pausing gives your brain a chance to catch up and organize your words. This reduces the chance of getting stuck or tripping over words. It makes your speaking experience less stressful and more enjoyable. And here's something interesting. Native English speakers pause naturally all the time. It's part of how they speak without even thinking about it. When you listen to English speakers, try to notice where they pause in questions. You'll find that those tiny breaks happen right after the first question word. This pattern is universal, and something you can learn by listening and practicing. When you add pauses to your speech, you also improve your listening skills. Because you're more aware of how English sounds and where the breaks are, you'll understand other people better when they speak. This makes conversations easier and less confusing. Pausing is also a great way to manage nerves. Speaking in a foreign language can feel overwhelming, especially when you're trying to ask questions. But slowing down and pausing gives you control. It helps calm your mind and reduces anxiety because you're not rushing or guessing what to say next. If you want to take your practice further, try recording yourself asking questions with pauses. Listen to how you sound. Are your pauses clear and natural? Are you giving each question word space to stand out? Practice until it feels comfortable, then try using pauses in real conversations. You'll be surprised how much better people understand you and how more confident you feel. Remember, the key is not to overthink it or try to pause for too long. The pauses should be natural, like a soft breath, just enough to separate the important parts of your question. It's about rhythm and flow, not stopping completely. Using pauses in your questions is a simple, practical tip that can instantly improve your English pronunciation and communication. It helps you speak clearly, be understood, and sound more natural. When you practice this, you're not only improving your speaking skills, you're also building confidence, making conversations easier, and connecting better with the people you talk to. So, next time you ask a question, remember to pause slightly after the first word. Give your listener time to process what you're saying, and give yourself time to pronounce each word clearly. It's a small habit with big results. And as you practice, your English will sound smoother, more natural, and more professional. I want to share one of the simplest yet most effective practice tips I have found for improving your English pronunciation, especially when it comes to asking questions like a pro, and that is to record yourself asking real-life questions. It might sound a little strange or even a bit uncomfortable at first, but trust me, it's one of the best ways to hear yourself and catch things you wouldn't notice just by speaking normally. When you listen back, you get a clear picture of how you really sound, and that awareness is the first step toward improving. Here's how you can do it easily. Start by thinking of 5 questions that you actually use or could use every day. They can be simple, practical questions you would ask at work, in a cafe, or just chatting with a friend. For example, questions like, what time does the meeting start? Or where's the nearest grocery store? Or even, how do I get to the train station? The key is to choose questions that feel natural to your daily routine because practicing phrases that are useful and relevant helps you build confidence quickly. When you practice questions you actually need, it becomes easier to use them in real conversations. Once you have your 5 questions, take out your phone or any recording device you have. Most phones have a built-in voice recorder, and that's more than enough for this exercise. Find a quiet place where you can speak freely without interruptions or background noise. When you finish recording all 5 questions, listen to the playback carefully. It might feel a bit strange hearing your own voice, but try to listen like a teacher would. Are you raising your voice at the end of the question like a true question? Does your what, where, when, or how sound clear and strong? Or do you notice any words running together or being too fast? Do your questions sound like statements or commands instead of genuine questions? These are important things to catch because fixing them will make you sound more natural and make your questions easier to understand. One thing you might notice is that you're rushing through some parts, especially at the beginning. That's very common. Many learners feel nervous or try to speak fast to sound fluent, but this often causes important question words to get lost or unclear. Hearing yourself say it aloud can help you become more aware of when you speed up too much. Then, in your next recording, try to slow down and focus on making your question words clear. You can even try adding a small pause after the first question word to give yourself and your listener a moment to catch the meaning. You don't need to do this for a long time to see results. Just 5 minutes a day of recording and listening can give you powerful insights and help you build better habits. The more you practice, the more natural it will feel to speak with the right intonation and clarity. And because you're practicing questions you actually use, you're training your brain and mouth to get ready for real conversations. This is the kind of practice that makes a big difference in your confidence and fluency. Another great thing about recording yourself is that it helps you track your progress over time. You can keep old recordings and listen to them again after a week or 2 of practice. You'll be able to hear how much you've improved, which is incredibly motivating. Sometimes progress feels slow or invisible, but hearing your own voice, change and improve is real proof that you're moving forward. If you want to make this practice even more effective, try to record your questions in different places or situations. Maybe one day in your room, another day while waiting at a bus stop or during a quiet walk. Changing your environment can help you get used to speaking English naturally, no matter where you are. This builds your confidence to ask questions anytime and anywhere without hesitation. When you get comfortable with this, try to add variety to your questions. Start with simple yes/no questions like, is the store open? And then move to WH questions like, where can I find a good restaurant? Or, what time does the museum close? Mixing different question types helps you practice different intonations and rhythms, so your speaking becomes more flexible and natural. Remember, this practice is not about perfection or sounding like a native speaker. It's about being clear and confident enough to be understood. That means focusing on what matters most: rising intonation, clear question words, and a comfortable pace. When you practice with this mindset, your English will improve steadily and naturally. Finally, don't forget to enjoy this process. It might feel a bit odd at first, but recording yourself is a form of self-care in language learning. You're giving yourself the chance to listen, reflect, and improve on your own terms. Celebrate the small victories, like when you notice your voice rising at the right place or when your how sounds clearer than before. These small wins add up and keep you motivated. So grab your phone, pick your 5 questions, and start recording today. Make it a daily habit. 5 minutes a day, listening and speaking your real-life questions out loud. This simple practice will boost your confidence, sharpen your pronunciation, and make you sound more natural when you ask questions in English. You'll notice people responding better, conversations flowing easier, and most importantly, you'll feel proud of your progress every time you press play and hear your own voice getting better and better. Today, I want to take a moment with you to reflect on everything we've talked about regarding the power of pronunciation in asking questions. It might seem like a small part of language, but really it's one of the biggest keys to being understood and feeling confident when you speak English. Pronunciation is not just about getting every sound perfect. It's about making sure your message comes through clearly, naturally, and in a way that invites connection and understanding. This is especially true when you're asking questions because questions are how we open up conversations, learn new things, and connect with others. Throughout this episode, we've explored how the way you say your questions affects how people respond to you. From Luca's story in Milan, who learned that rising intonation makes all the difference, to May in Seoul, who found that starting her questions clearly and not rushing helped listeners follow her better. We've seen that small changes in pronunciation and rhythm can create big results. Akeem's experience in Nairobi showed us how important the musical rhythm of English is, while Elena from Madrid reminded us that pausing just the right amount can make your meaning clear and give you confidence. I want you to remember this. You don't need to speak like a native speaker, to be understood, or to ask questions like a pro. In fact, focusing on being perfect can sometimes hold you back. What matters most is clarity. When your first question word is clear, when your voice rises or falls in the right places, and when you slow down enough to be understood, you're already doing an amazing job. Your goal is communication, not perfection. Every time you practice, you're building your ability to connect with others and express yourself. Mistakes are just steps on this journey, not roadblocks. Think about the questions you ask every day. Maybe it's at work, like, when is the deadline? Or, can you help me with this report? Or perhaps in daily life, where can I buy tickets? Or, what time does the store close? These are the building blocks of real conversations, and practicing them with clear pronunciation and natural rhythm is exactly what will help you sound more confident. The good news is, you don't have to change everything overnight. Start small with one question at a time. Focus on making that question sound clear and inviting. Over time, you'll build a toolbox of questions that feel easy and natural to say. Now here's a little challenge for you. What is one question you want to practice today? Maybe it's a question you felt nervous to ask before. Maybe it's something simple but important. Take a moment to think about it. Say it out loud slowly, paying attention to your intonation and the clarity of your first word. If you want, record yourself and listen back. Notice how you sound and make little adjustments. This simple daily practice will boost your confidence more than you might expect. If you found value in today's episode, please remember to follow our podcast so you don't miss future episodes that will help you improve your English step by step. If you feel this content could help a friend or family member who is also learning English, share it with them. Sometimes just sharing one episode can make a big difference in someone else's learning journey. And if you can, leave a rating or review. It helps us reach more learners like you who want to speak English clearly and confidently. Learning. English is a journey full of challenges, but it's also full of small victories. Pronunciation, especially when asking questions, is one of those areas where small changes bring big rewards. You've taken an important step today just by listening and reflecting. Keep practicing, stay curious, and be patient with yourself. Remember, every mistake you make is not a failure, but a sign that you're learning and growing. The more you focus on clear pronunciation, tone, and rhythm, the easier it becomes to speak English naturally and with confidence. I'm really proud of you for dedicating time to improve your speaking skills. Keep practicing those questions, keep listening to your voice, and keep connecting with others in English. You have the tools now, and with consistent practice, you will see your confidence and clarity grow. Thank you for spending this time with me on the English Talk community. I look forward to continuing this journey together, helping you speak English like a pro, one question at a time.